Well, welcome back, noobs and noobsettes. And this is the second part of my interview with Hair Alpha. Initially, there was not going to be a part two, but we tried to get through as much content as we possibly could. But just because it was an interview, there was also a full conversation going on, so a lot of things got skipped. I know after the interview, Alpha and I spoke at length about a lot of things that we didn't touch on. We figured out that Alpha has an addiction. I have a vaping and saying like addiction. So we're going to try to finish up some of the questions that we didn't touch on, maybe go into some things that weren't initially on the questions list that we thought of later. So whatever, here we go. Ready? Okay, so Alpha, one of the questions you had wanted to answer that I basically was almost like one of my first questions was the why is it called Salt Factory, and where did you get that idea?
Initially, when I split from Nologam, I had to come up with a name pretty much off the bat. It was a spontaneous type of thing that I didn't plan for. So I thought maybe I can call the server something simple and straightforward, like Alpha's Faction Free Roam. And since I'm not the most creative type, I mean, you've seen my in-game nickname, which I've used since I was 12 or something along those lines. I just stuck with it. The server
Pretty
was
cocky
called...
for a 12-year-old.
Well, it wasn't meant to display me as a big alpha type of guy. It was just something that I've seen when playing against the AI in Star Wars Battlefront. But
right.
That's a different topic.
Yeah.
So the server was called Alpha's Faction Free Roam. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. ASF for short. And this is still how the code base is called up to this day. But then a couple of weeks or months into this new server, a guy called Salah22 came up to me. You've probably seen him before on the server. He's a rare occurrence these days, but he used to be a fairly common player. He also played on ATC a lot. And
sounds familiar, but
he was a fairly common player. And he just came to me and said, "Hey, you should totally call this Alpha Salt Factory." And from his side, it was probably more of a joke than anything else. But I thought to myself, you know what? That's actually a good idea. I just liked the idea, so I went ahead. I renamed the server.
Was it because of the ban? People basically just teasing each other and harassing each other in the chat.
Partially, yes. I looked at the name and I saw some resemblance. I looked at the name and decided this isn't actually inaccurate. It has a certain charm to it, but it's also funny because it's kind of true, because the server is full of banter and salt going on. And it is more unique. It is a bit more catchy than Alpha's Faction Free Roam, like the most German, objective, engineered name you could come up with, probably.
Ja.
So I renamed the server just to go ahead.
No, go finish.
So I renamed the server just to see how it would be like. How would people respond to it? Would people still find it? Because obviously renaming it the top Just Cause 2 multiplayer server is going to have some kind of implication. And some players literally struggle with joining a server when it renames. But it worked out okay. And I got used to the name, and so did everyone else. The abbreviation ASF also started spreading. And I thought to myself, you know what? This is a pretty solid name. And then whenever I started doing the Discord or started creating separate servers, when things started spreading into more of a community type of thing and not just the Just Cause server, I, of course, always needed a name. And I thought to myself, is there any reason why I shouldn't just use Alpha Salt Factory? I mean, I'm still not creative. I would still just sit here for a week straight trying to come up with a name. Why don't I just stick to Alpha Salt Factory?
Now, is that a common term in Germany? Because when I first saw it, I didn't think of the name. I just saw the number and I joined. Because in America, saying salty kind of usually refers to like pirates, right? Salty dog. I think even another game that's like a bar you visit. I think it was maybe even Far Cry or something like that. The bar is called like the Salty Dog, where you actually meet a German guy. Believe it or not. Um, but I don't. Is that something like universal? I'd have to look at the genealogy of that. But that really does kind of like, it almost means like grumpy, grouchy. Somebody who just literally just wants to pick a fight. Is that something that's common over there? They're using the term salt for that type of conversation between people.
Actually, not at all. In German, there's no the word salt doesn't have any form of meaning in the same sense. Um, the the thing is, when you look at the word in the context of the internet, this is where people decided, the word salt kinda also can mean like just mean or
Yeah, there's
or rude.
somebody's demeanor. Just they're just really like kind of like a grumpy old man. He's just really
Yes,
salty.
yes. They extended the definition a bit, like things happen on the internet, and it was universally understood at that point by everyone already that when you speak about a salt factory, you mean a place that's fairly maybe even toxic, but not toxic, but a little toxic, like the type of banter you would expect. Like salter was basically the another word for banter.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, bantering in the way of your literal. I mean, like you see in the game, right? People trying to goad people on. Getting under somebody's skin. And yeah, I guess it would be the individual themselves. You know, usually that's usually saying he's salty, right? That you're really inferring to the person's actual personality. But I mean, after a while, it means like, oh, I see why it's called Salt Factory, because everybody in here is just hurling insults at each other, and maybe even not even angry, but just so you have to wonder yourself, gee, I wonder if it's your fault. Since you called it the Salt Factory, people are like, oh, maybe I'm supposed to come in here and just tear somebody a new one with an insult every 2 seconds. But it does make it fun. Like I said, just dealing with as we talked before, listening to Marv and going after people, and just the way they went after people was just kind of funny. Just to hear how how does a British or a German or a there's people from all over the world, how do they go about insulting each other? I'm like, it seems pretty similar to what they do in America, except for what we mentioned before, the language was the use of the C word. Which in America is like, oh my God, I can't believe you just said the C word, whereas in other places like in Britain and in Australia, which are kind of like similar, type of mindset people, they use that all the word like they're saying hi. Like instead of saying buddy, they go, hey, what's up? I guess I'll just say the word for contact. They're like, hey, what's up, cunt? And I'm like, oh my, what? Like, and I'm like, and if you were to say that in America, that is like, that's beyond the F word almost, So yeah, I guess that makes sense why you would want to call it the software. And it, like I said, when you look back on it, like, yeah, it makes total sense, right?
I mean, since it's just a name to me, it doesn't even necessarily need to make too much sense. It just has to fill in the purpose of being a name, something that people remember in their heads, and that you can at least to some point or some extent explain. And I think it's done that purpose pretty well.
All right. So one of the other questions that you wanted to answer, and we talked about this after the last interview, and I had mentioned the story that I had told before was and you said, well, I want to actually answer this question verbally, because I think if you said if I typed it out, nobody would believe me. So so when I said if there was any player you'd want to meet, what player would you actually want to meet face to face, and basically like sit down and have a cup of coffee with and say, what the hell with you?
What I would say is I would honestly be happy meeting pretty much anyone from the server. Not maybe not necessarily in a big type of like gathering of too many people at once, but just having a
Right.
one-to-one conversation with most of the people on the server, like those who are active in chat, not just someone who's completely random who just joins the server to drive around Panau in a circle and not talk to anyone, but someone who joins for the more social side of the game. I'll be perfectly happy just having a meet with them, having a one-to-one, just talking about things, getting to know their personal side. Because the thing is, when you meet someone on the internet, the information you get about this person and the feel you get for how this person is completely different than when you talk to someone in person in real life.
Oh
It's
yeah.
it's
I mean, imagine having a. Go ahead.
I was just going to compare it to talking on TeamSpeak versus just chatting in game. For example,
Mm.
you're a really good example, to be honest, because I never thought I could connect to you in a way that I am right now by talking to you on TeamSpeak over chatting with you in Discord or on the server. And this is why I think it's a shame why it's kind of hard to just get a hold of some people in voice chat to just have like a more personal conversation with them.
Because you
And
actually did you did that one time. It was actually on Discord, and I think there was like 10 of us. I explained to you before, and most people already know this, that I play at work, so I really don't really do any type of like audio or talking, just because I can't do it. And I think this one time I was either talking. Yeah, I was actually talking because I spoke to you. There was like 10 people on. It was like you, me, Rot was there, GA, Sword, X3 Mortis. He's gone. He's had like a bunch of different names. His original name was Aiden. That's what I call him all the time. But there's like a bunch of people. We actually like. It seemed like we were actually talking like normal humans, versus how like you said, how it actually transpires like in the game, or just typing in chat. So I think that was like the only time I think I've had one-on-ones with other people. Like I said, I've spent a lot of time actually with Marv, actually actually talking to him through, I think it was Steam or something. But yeah, like I said, I had mentioned that one time. I was like, what would it be like if you got every single person, like I said, the core, not even just the core players, but people who've played over the years, into one room? What do you think would happen? Would people actually want to show up to that, and how would they react? Even people that probably. And I said, even if people like actually hated each other and went to war and they were constantly fighting, and I bet you if they got face to face, their demeanor would completely change. They wouldn't be the same person. And people have even admitted to me, like, oh, who I am in the game, I'm a completely different person in real life. Which I don't think I try not to be. Like what how I am in the game is pretty much how I am. And I think you are for the most part too. And Dennis and other people, but speaking of like Rod, he is a different person completely from his persona in the game versus in real life. Fish is, the same person, but I was like, why would you? I mean, like I said, unless you're playing a game, if you're doing a like role play or whatever, why would you be a different person? But to each their own, right?
well, it's also just something that you don't necessarily always have control over, because when you just talk via text, there's a lot of emotion and other things you can convey with your voice other than the real message that will just kind of get lost. For example, I'm someone who talks very sarcastically many times, but when I'm just texting, unless someone is fully used to my over the top sarcasm everywhere, they tend to misinterpret it as me just being way too direct and strict, and for being way too rude. I've had that happen to me
Right.
many times. And this is something that doesn't necessarily happen when you hear how I say things, which obviously fully gets lost when you're in text chat. And to touch upon
Yeah.
the gathering you brought up, to be perfectly honest, I think not many people in the community share the same idea of meeting others as I do. I think many people would just say, "Oh, and person X and person Y would be there, and I could not care less about meeting them, so they just wouldn't show up in the first place." And not
Well, I
just
know
that,
you'll be shocked to hear this, but Fox said she would love to do it. That she would
Fox.
definitely go. And Rosa said, she's like, oh yeah, I would definitely love to do that.
I am actually shocked to hear about this. You are right.
Right. I mean, because like again, right, all you know of this person is what comes out of their keyboard.
Yes.
And yes, obviously their actions and their gameplay, but do you really, really know this person? You don't. There's just no way. So for all you know, she could be practically, halfway to being a nun, which I wouldn't put money on. But you just don't know what they're like. And so to meet, for somebody like even her to say, oh, I would definitely like to do that. That sounds like it would be fun. I'm not really totally surprised because most people are like that. Everybody wants to know what, when you hear somebody's, voice for the first time or actually what they physically, like people always do that, right? What do you look like? What do you sound like? Because, yes, people have a certain way of typing or communicating, but you really don't know the person unless you actually see their face or hear their voice. So but you wouldn't actually say you couldn't pick like an actual individual. You'd want to meet like, like I said, like the core group, you'd want to get together and actually meet them. And you never, like we did this last time, but I'm going to do it again. You actually said you actually had somebody that you almost met. Who was it? You never mentioned it.
It was actually Salah 22.
It was who?
The Salah 22, the guy who came up with the salt factory name, because his grandparents live in the same city as me. But like I said, it never really happened that we managed to get together. Because it was always, I think, around Christmas and around the time frame where I leave the city to visit my grandparents. So it's a bit of a bad time frame.
So you don't have an actual individual name. You don't want to give one.
No. It would be too hard to actually, pick one. Like I said, just anyone who is communicative and just wants to have a chat. I get that there's also a lot of super introverted people on JC2MP. I mean, that's just the nature of the internet. You find many people who don't really want to go out there and chat with other people, which is also why I would think the attendance of, let's say, a big community meetup wouldn't be too great, even if we were geographically not spread across the entire planet. But yeah, I suppose.
So I would definitely. I mean, I've mentioned this to Fish before. I said, I would actually love to go and get drunk with Fishy.
I think many.
You actually have even the chat logs, him logging in, being drunk.
Yes.
And I'm not much of a drinker, but I have definitely gotten drunk before. And it's like, so he'd be probably the only person that I would actually. Not that I wouldn't want to meet you or other people, but yeah, if I could pick one name, it would definitely be him. He was actually the first person I actually became friends with when I first joined, because he was, to me, even him being a player and him being even a moderator really encompasses the type of person, just in life in general that you would actually want to meet. Because he is really like I said, as you guys mentioned in the podcast you did a few weeks ago, he's just overall just actually a genuinely nice guy and genuinely cares. I don't think he's actually he is who he is online. He's not faking, because a lot of people can fake being nice. That's actually a trait you probably want to incorporate for yourself to learn who's actually being genuine. And I even told that to him. I said, you're actually a genuine guy, and that's hard to come across, especially just some random person you're meeting on the internet. And it definitely you can see it even when he's moderating. Right, he just doesn't want to just drop the hammer on people. He actually tries to, converse. I took a lot of, notes from him when I did the job. Just like this, what's the type of person you want to be on here? Because as you log on, there's many different types of personalities, and I think for me, he was the one that actually was like, for a young guy, he really does have his head on his shoulders, and he's actually quite kind. And being from South Africa, he even sent me an article. He's got the sexiest accent on the planet.
Is that scientifically proven?
No, actually he sent me the article. It said rankings of the sexiest accents on the in the world, and South Africa was number one. And he does have a cool. I mean, I'm sure you've spoken to him before. He's got a pretty cool South African accent is actually pretty neat.
It's actually been a while since I last spoke to him verbally.
Yeah, for me, I think it's been like a year. But he works a lot, out of town. That's why he has these stints where he's just not around for a long time. The poor guy, he's got to be away from home for such a long period of time. But yeah, for me, it would hands down, be Fishy. I think I actually even offered him one of my daughters. I don't remember which one, because I told him, I said, you got to come to America and move here, right? You got to get out of South Africa. I said, maybe if I can get you married to one of my daughters.
Did he follow up on the offer?
Well, the hard part was explaining to my wife how I know this guy. Like, how do you? who's this guy? And I'm not going to say his name, but even though he has it on Steam, he really has one of the coolest names in the world. I mean, he sounds like he could be a rock star almost. You know, his name is even cool. But yeah, maybe one day we'll meet up. But who knows, right? The world, as big as the world is actually quite small.
From
so
my
we'll
side, this is actually something that can happen because, of course, right now the world is a bit not what it's normally. But
you mean the COVID hoax?
Well, if you can call it a hoax, but I suppose that's a longer discussion. But the bottom line is, right now my job normally involves a lot of traveling, but right now obviously we're kind of all just stuck at home. But once my job involves more traveling again, I do actually get around to go to places where maybe some people from the player base live. And every now and then I actually did announce it on Discord, or at least mention it, that I will be going to city XYZ for 2 weeks for work, and if anyone wants to meet up, we could just make it happen. Actually,
you'll be the one at the bar wearing lederhosen.
Naturally, this is dictated by law. Every German who goes outside of Germany has to wear lederhosen to represent their national identity.
Little shorts. Where's the little shorts that you guys wear?
You mean there is a short version of lederhosen. The thing is, that's southern Germany. I live in Western Germany, basically. So even though everyone thinks lederhosen, it's actually just Bavaria, the area down south in Germany. And even there, it's mostly just for cliche or when people get drunk at Oktoberfest. But no normal human being actually walks around.
Yeah, but they wear those little shorts with the suspenders.
Yeah, they are lederhosen with suspenders.
Like wait, is that what those things are called?
I'm pretty sure, yeah. From what I know, anyways.
I don't know why. I guess I was thinking of what are those things called that women wear?
A dunda.
The little stretchy underwear pants things that they wear. What are they called? We're going off topic. That's my fault. Okay. So you want to continue on that, or you want to go on to the next one?
Oh yeah, no. I just want to finish off. So yeah, basically, once I am back to going around the world, I will happily just actually tell people, hey, I'm coming to location XYZ. If anyone wants to meet up, well, let's talk. I was even there was a certain chance that I would meet Xis, 60, Arlen.
Right.
In June this year, because I was going to go to Birmingham to work at an event there, a Dota event. And since he's into Dota, I could have given him tickets and he would have just dropped by and actually watched the show. And that would have been an opportunity for both of us to meet up, catch up. But naturally, due to how things are in the world right now, it just didn't happen.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears here. We're going to go right into some of the questions that we didn't touch on as far as your specific job in the game as far as your coding is concerned. One of the things was things that you wish you could do, but you couldn't do. We didn't really expound on that. And so if you could just, run with it and just say this, God, if I could just do this, I would definitely do that. And that also led into part of we never really covered, the little wooden stake things. If you could remove those, would you do it?
To answer that one first, yes, I absolutely would. I'm someone who spent a pretty serious amount of time trying to drive the Rushmore run in a PvD without hitting them, because every time you hit them, they slow you down, they cause visual damage, and it's just really annoying. But they are a part of the base game map, and the base game map I just cannot modify, unfortunately.
Well, the thing is, you made it so that now, when you're passive, you literally can walk through a car. Cars don't bump into each other anymore. Why can't you just make it so that they just don't hit your car at all?
Because I'm limited to disabling or enabling collision between your player and every other player or vehicle, or your vehicle and every other player or vehicle. Those are the only combinations, the only 4 combinations that I can influence. I can't actually influence whether or not your player or your vehicle collides with other parts of the terrain. So maybe houses or other objects like the stilts, or just the terrain in general. I mean, if I could disable that, you would just fly through the floor.
So you couldn't even change what they are. Like,
No.
you just change them all into motorcycles, and we'll just drive right through them.
Negative. There's no way for me to even.
I'm trying. Throw me a bone here. I'm trying to maybe I can think of something that he hasn't thought of, which is highly unlikely. But
Hey, I always appreciate out of the box thinking.
try to turn them into. Try to turn them into. Can you turn them into flowers? You just can't. You just can't manipulate those things in any way.
As far as the code is concerned, these things don't exist. The code doesn't even know there's a map. The code just knows there's players and vehicles, and they have certain positions somewhere. And for example, for the hit sync, for the custom hit sync, and a few other things, it can detect if you're colliding with something when you go into a certain direction from a certain point. So, for example, I have a bullet coming out of a weapon. I can tell when it hits a player, a vehicle, or just the ground. But I have no influence over objects that are just there by default, like these stills or like the glorious out of place signs you find all over Panau that are not that are just floating, or this quality double lamppost situation on the highway.
Yeah,
Not
there's
far
that
past
one,
Lemba.
and there's like a metal spike sticking out of the road.
That's also pretty quality. Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
one. I want to say there's maybe as much as I've driven, I can't actually say I've driven every single road, but I know that there's those two, and I've actually gotten the muscle memory. I know it's coming, even though I don't think about it. I know it's coming, and somehow now I've learned to like actively avoid it when it happens. Not that I don't end up crashing 20 yards down the road anyway, but
what you're saying is you can kind of get used to it and cope with it, essentially.
yeah, those little anomalies aren't the issue. The issue is that there are literally just so many things to hit. Now, of course, you don't want to make it so it's too easy. Obviously, you don't want to remove any type of challenge, but some of those things, I mean,
I'm totally with you. The map is just broken in many places, and you can tell
it
was basically.
I mean, even compared to Just Cause 3, it's really cluttered. There's just so much stuff. I'm like, just like I know nothing about coding or writing games. Like, you seem to guys spend like an awful lot of time plunking those things down when you could have just fixed the stuff that was broken. It seemed like that would be more important, but no, they decided to, waste their budget on wooden spikes.
The thing is, how this happened is they didn't just go around placing them manually. I mean, this is a guess. Obviously, I'm not a game developer either, but I'm pretty sure they just drew a rough estimate of how they want the map to look like, and then had the game, like they basically wrote a generator that would then place down roads along the path that they designated as roads. And they specified that every road has these stupid stilts on the outsides, depending on the type of road, obviously. And a highway exit looks like this. And then all the green areas would automatically just be filled by random selections of random trees in random orientations. And that's how the map happened. That's how you can find many of these errors where you would say no human could have made this error. No human would have just put a sign that's just floating in the middle of the air. It was just more or less randomly placed, probably. And they didn't quite have the manpower or the budget to actually just go through all these things and make sure that the map makes sense. And you can definitely notice, like you mentioned, the difference to Just Cause 3, where they actually did put more effort into manually doing quality assurance on the map building. This is something you can see in, for example, a Grand Theft Auto game, where pretty much all of the map is built manually, where they just have gigantic teams just going to the city they're trying to reproduce, taking pictures of many like intersections and buildings and just general areas that they want to reproduce, and then go in there and make sure that what they put into the game is as close to these as possible, and don't just have a machine randomly figure out where to put things that may or may not actually make sense in the end. This is a difference that you can definitely see between Grand Theft Auto and a few lower budget, at least up until the later iterations of Just Cause, lower budget open world games where they had to have an open world, but they didn't have the time or money to put into making a map proper. And to close the loop back to me influencing this, the problem is the map is stored in the base game files. All the locations of things, where which object is, where which terrain part is, where you find which roads, all this is in the base game map files. I'm not even sure if anyone managed to mod these in the single player. But the bottom line is, even if someone would be able to, it would still not translate into them being modifiable in the multiplayer, because as I explained in our first interview, the things you can modify in the single player are usually the exact opposite of what you can do in the multiplayer. And
So could you take it out of your own game on your computer? Could you take those stakes out of your own computer?
And that's what I was saying. I don't know if anyone actually managed to do this yet.
Well, give it a try, and then you can just log in. We'll give you remote access to everybody's computer on the server, and you can just do one at a time.
That sounds like a quality plan. But I think I would outsource that. When are you available? I heard you have a fair amount of time to discuss.
I'll leave the computer running. You can just log in. I'll send you $20, and
Oh, no, more the other way around. I would send you $20, but then you fix it on everyone's PC who joins the server.
Oh, you want me to do it? No, then I would just do it for myself and then win every race. For a change.
Honestly, though, technically speaking, it would be possible if someone was just able to modify the map files, which I'm not sure has happened yet. But
like I said, who's going to waste it? So so back onto the coding thing. What else would you like to do?
Yes, I was going to touch upon that as well. Now, I think the biggest thing that I would love to be able to modify are the stats of the base game weapons, and at least to an extent also the base game vehicles. Now, to further elaborate on the weapon part, the problem is, and I know most players won't actually notice or realize this because they just don't actually know how things like the custom hit sync work in the backend, but all the custom hit sync stuff going on is super workaroundy. And I would be much happier if I could just modify the amount of damage, the fire rate, the clip sizes, the entire behavior of the base game weapons, but then not have a custom hit sync workaroundy thing that just sits on top of everything and half works and half doesn't really work in areas that people may not necessarily see directly.
So you haven't changed anything like magazine size, the strength of, or I would say not the strength, but the range of the weapons. Those are all just the way they are in the game.
The magazine size, well, all of these things I couldn't even modify if I wanted to. That's the entire issue here. But since I use the way I do it is I have the custom hit sync on top of things. When you're on foot, it just looks if a bullet goes out of your magazine to tell, okay, this guy probably just shot. And then it does its own logic to check where a bullet would have gone, which is completely independent from the actual visible bullet that's actually happening in game. So even though you fired the bullet in game and it's going somewhere and it hits something, what you will actually practically hit will be determined invisibly in the background by a piece of code that runs in an invisible line to where you were aiming.
When I first started playing and I started sniping people, the bullet actually hits you and what you actually see are two completely different things.
Exactly.
Because I'm sitting there, I'm dodging the bullet, but it's it's almost like it's instantaneous from the time it leaves the gun till the time it actually hits you. It's like as soon as they shoot it, you get hit.
Yes.
There's no real time in between the two, but you see the bullet later. Like you actually see the bullet flying at you, but the bullet's already hitting you by the time you've actually seen it travel through the air.
And these are things that make it hard for my mind to rest whenever I do anything related to the hit sync. There's another issue which I wouldn't necessarily want to explain, just because people would be able to exploit it if they knew it existed. But there is an even greater issue that I fully cannot even work against on my server. That is also related to me just not being able to modify base game weapons. So this is why I would just want to be able to do it, just to get rid of this crazy workaroundy stuff and just have it work like you as a player would expect it to work. You shoot a bullet, the bullet hits something, and it deals a certain amount of damage, and I can influence that damage that this bullet does, as opposed to having to block the damage received by that bullet and then internally hacking my own bullet in there. To move on to the vehicle part, I would like to be able to change the stats on vehicles, not necessarily to make every vehicle like super crazy or to just fully destroy the entire meta of how every vehicle works, but just to make some useless vehicles more useful, because there are many vehicles that are kind of just not really useful because they are just objectively inferior to other vehicles in every aspect. For example, if you compare a Martin Storm to an MV, the Martin Storm is slower. It is a tiny bit more stable, not enough to really justify its lack of acceleration and top speed compared to an MV, and the MV has more seats. Why would you ever drive a Martin Storm other than personal preference when it's not up to stats?
That's the thing that's always like, really kind of boggles my mind, is really because, anytime somebody asks you about driving, how do you drive this car? How fast does this car go? It's like, it's amazing, really, especially the amount of vehicles and how really quite different they all perform in relation to each other. There's really quite a stark difference in every aspect. How fast they go, how fast they take off the line, how they turn. All those things. I'm like, geez, you guys really spend an awful lot of time calculating all these different things. And yeah, like some cars, like, why would you? I see some people like, why are you driving that? Like, what's the purpose of driving that vehicle? And like, again, because they just want to. They just want to try it.
Yes.
I think I've literally drifted everything there is just to see if it can be done. I've actually seen car drift a limo at the racetrack successfully. I was like, wow, did you actually try? You must have tried doing this before, because I can't. I've tried it. Yeah, you can get it sideways and drift it, but there's no controlling it. But he actually did. But Carr's a different story. He's an OP player in every aspect. But yeah, I've always wondered that. Like, why would you drive that car? But again, that's the beauty of the game, right? You can just do whatever you want whenever you feel like it, and drive whatever you want, fly whatever you want. But yeah, that would be, to me, if I were in your position, not being able to, make those changes and modifications, probably quite frustrating on your part, because it's almost limiting you to how much you can change the game, so it doesn't become boring.
Yes.
And that's what, and tuning really kind of did that too, because people are just, because you can move the wheels up, down, in, out, the lift coefficient you can change, the acceleration, all that stuff. But yeah, I would see how that would be frustrating for you to, not be able to. But there's got to be somebody that can do it. But it probably goes back to that developer question. Those guys probably could and maybe would do an update, but it's been so long they think nobody cares about it anymore. So why bother, right?
It's kind of back to the reason why that I explained last time why I can't modify certain things. And it's because they are base game files. The vehicle stats, you can probably very easily modify them when you just mod your single player game, because it's just a binary file. You have an XML converter that you can download, and you're going to have an XML file where it just says max speed, whatever. You just put something else there, you convert it back to binary file, drop it in your drop zone folder, and your PVD suddenly goes twice the speed. The problem is all of these base game files are just non-accessible in the multiplayer. There was a long-term plan from the JC2MP devs regarding this. The idea was, how about we just add Steam Workshop support, and that way a server could enforce certain modifications to be installed, and then Steam would take care of your game having these modifications loaded when you join the server. So you would join my server, and then you would your game would in the background automatically download files that make the PVD faster, essentially. But as it stands, these files are completely, entirely inaccessible to me as the person who runs the server. And I suppose there are ways how you, for yourself, could change these values to have a faster PVD, once again, in this example. But obviously that would be an issue in terms of hacking, because people, if they participate in races and their PVD is objectively 5 kilometers an hour, faster, which is not too significant to notice, but at the same time enough to give you the edge, that would be an issue.
Yes. We discussed that yesterday after the recording was finished.
Yes. It's just
regarding an individual, but we won't go into that.
Well, yes, but yeah.
Yeah.
Overall, it's just if you modify the base game files, it would have to be dictated and controlled by the server which base game files are modified. Otherwise, you end up with a gigantic mess.
Right.
And tying into the vehicle stat modification stuff, one thing that I would really love to do as a result would be making planes faster. Because planes are ridiculously slow in this game, and I do not quite get the decision. I suppose it was because in the single player planes are useless. Because you fly past things so quickly, you don't really have any chance to actually shoot at them.
Right.
The only purpose of planes in the single player is to move around from A to B quickly. But
yeah, there's one mission, I think, with a fighter plane, I think.
Yes, Fly Me to the Moon, where you take off at Cape Carnival and shoot down a satellite rocket that is taking off. Oh, I also just thought of that. But that works because they spawn this thing in at a pretty great distance, and it's moving further away from you at the same time, so it maximizes the amount of time you actually have to shoot at it. But every normal object that you would encounter on the ground would spawn in. You would quickly have to adjust to shoot at it before you fly past it, and then you pass it already again. Actually, there's a second mission. All right, you're right. There's a group mission at Desert Airport where they tell you to destroy, well, not fully destroy. Rig. I think it's, an oil rig.
Yeah.
To damage it to a certain point.
Yeah.
And even that is quite frustrating because there you realize how hard it is to actually get a sort amount of hits in on each approach, and you just end up flying back and forth the entire time. And it's just kind of, it just doesn't quite fit into the meta. So
the worst part is trying to, after you go from multiplayer, if you go back into the base game, your instant reaction is to try to insta brake and you end up crashing.
Oh yes,
or you're sitting there trying to VTOL or boost. I'm like, what? Oh yeah, that's right, single player.
The insta brake is even something that happened to me when I went back to Grand Theft Auto after playing Just Cause.
Yeah. Oh, I do that even in other games. If there's anything I'm doing that I normally do in multiplayer, I try to do. I'm like, oh wait, I just can't stop, or I can't. There's no VTOL. There's no. They try to. You're always constantly hitting the shift, trying to boost out of there. I'm like, oh, that's right, you can't. There's one game. I forget what it is. No, it's Far Cry. And if you can get a vehicle and you try to drive away, well, I'm always trying to hit shift, to drive away faster because it's just such a habit. But in that game, it activates the the auto drive. So I'm hitting shift. I'm like hitting it on and off. I just keep flashing on my screen. Auto drive on, auto drive off, back and forth. I'm like, oh wait, I'm playing a different game. That's not going to work.
Yes.
And you can see it almost just like we were chatting the other day. I was like, oh, T habit. Sometimes when I'm typing, I hit T. When it's not necessary. You just get into the habit of getting used to being able to do all these things in the game, especially if you play it a lot. So would you say that kind of covers all the coding things you wanted to discuss that we didn't touch on last time?
One more thing, which is more of a technical thing, but I think it definitely deserves mentioning. One thing that I wish I was able to do was run things in parallel. It's a kind of technical thing, and not many people know about it. But in JC2MP, everything runs on a single thread. Basically, only one single action is performed at a time, which includes the base game doing its logic, like the base game just working like the game does. Then the JC2MP component telling the server your position and incorporating other players' positions into the base game to tell you, hey, this other player moved, and all the custom logic that's happening on the server, like, oh yeah, draw a name tag here, draw a minimap blip, calculate whether or not you're able to drop a bearing bomb right now. All these kinds of things happen in a row. They don't happen in parallel. So the more coding you do, the more custom logic you put into the server and the client, the slower things go. And you're very limited in terms of how many fancy things you can do until the game really starts decreasing in frame rate. On some other servers, you were clearly able to see this, where you would join and you would have a lot of things going on your screen and a lot of logic. And these servers had great ideas, but they just weren't able to fully implement them because the more they will put on, the more unplayable the actual game gets, which is why I am also so careful about the things I add, because it's just way too easy for all the custom things to limit your performance. But if it was possible to run some of these things separately in parallel, basically next to the entire game logic and synchronization logic, you could do a lot more. You would be a lot less limited in terms of how many things you could actually make happen. So this is something I'd really love to see.
Well, I'm going to pretend I understood what you were talking about, but I'm not going to try because why bother? I have no idea what you're talking about, but it makes sense to you, and I'm sure there's people out there that understand.
I was going to say someone out there will. I know
Yeah.
it gets a bit technical, but
I'm just going to say, if you say so, dude, and just take your word for it.
All right, but yeah, now I'm clear to move on.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to get back into some of the players.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's probably players that even people that even today don't really know about. We touched on a couple. Is there any ones that you're just like literally just I would wish I could just forget this person. I can't believe they joined. I don't know what they're doing. They're just a big hassle. Do you have like a one that either you want to name or you don't, or maybe there's like a bunch of people or anything like that you just want to mention without obviously calling them names, but something that you just like to forget?
There are definitely people out there, not just one but multiple. I wish to forget them to a different degree. Like some of them is like not that big of a deal, and some of them I really wish I could just erase that part from my brain, but I prefer not to go into names here.
How about can you say, I know you mentioned Kinky last time. Is there anybody else you'd like to mention? You just like I just when he's on, I like playing with this person. They're just great fun to be with.
So great people now. I suppose all of the old staff members that kind of stopped playing by now. So people like Atra, Wiz, Baku, Navarian. He's still around. I know that, but he's not active in the game anymore.
Yeah,
Cap,
I've never seen him. I don't think.
Cap and Cookie, someone who appears in old videos. He was also playing in 2014 when I started. Sky, I was always great with Sky, but I think she's finally managed to quit the game for good. Something she wanted to do for years.
She was on. She's been on, and I would say probably the last month. I think I saw her.
She was, but she doesn't really make a habit out of it anymore.
She's got. I don't know. I've dog fighted with her. I don't know if you've ever sat in a Pel with her flying.
Yes, I have.
It is amazing. I was like, wow. Again, with the PvP thing, how in the world? And I even asked, like, what are you doing? How are you doing this? I mean, and she was like, I'm going to try doing this one thing. And okay, so the bridge that goes across the racetrack, there's those little areas,
Yes.
where you can actually stand. Okay, she can actually fly a plane through there.
Yes, I know. I mean, she's literally spent most of her time on the server, especially while she was staff, just doing these kinds of things because there was nothing really to do. It was back in 2015, 16-ish when Just Cause started dying a bit, and the server, well, at that time it was Nologam. It wasn't actually the top server, but only somewhere in the top 3. So you would have times at night where you would just want to play Just Cause, but there was just nobody to play with. So you ended up just doing random things like that. And for Sky, it was just so much time she ended up putting into doing random things like just flying around the map that
and not
she ended
slowly.
up being really
it's not
good
like I remember there was another time I was flying in a plane and I flew through something that was kind of difficult to pilot this particular plane through. And I said to you, oh, what did you think of that? You were like, well, you did it slow enough. Like, obviously you're going to get it through. You were going like really slow. And then when I started flying with her, I said, are you using a controller? Or she's like, no, I'm just using a keyboard. I'm like, really? I'm like, how are you? I mean, to me, it's as you're playing the game, like you can see the wheels turning. It's just it's usually like an all or nothing. It's either all right or all left, right? There's no, like in a real car, there's no gradual turning. It's you are turning full left or you're turning full right. And when you watch her fly, there doesn't seem to be any type of even in real fighter planes, when somebody moves the stick, it moves and then it stops. You don't see much of like a smooth. And when she's flying, she's like, no, I'm using a keyboard, but I'm just hitting it so fast and quick, like little taps that it looks like it's smooth. I'm like, just wear your fingers out because Some of the areas that she's able to fly into, and I would try like dozens of times. I'm just a little, and there's, it's not just her. There's a lot of people that can do that stuff. Like for instance, Kink with the Urga, Green Wizard and his ST. There's a lot of the drifters that can do stuff like that. But there's also a lot of good. It seems like everybody gets their niche. I don't know if we didn't discuss this in the game, but we were talking about Blaze and his ability with the bearing. And for me, or for most players who do anything, like they parachute out of a plane, right? You kind of have to turn around, respawn, and then you're going the other direction. And he's able to seem to do it like instantaneously. And there's these people who've just learned these tricks on a particular vehicle that to me are just like, wow, did you just figure out how to do that, or did you try it 1,000 times, or are you just that good at video games? But so back on your topic, there's there's people that you like to play with, and it's funny because I think Sky maybe is the only person I think I've ever even heard of.
Yeah, that's the entire problem of it. Many of these were staff members. Well, Wiz you heard of, Wizard.
Yeah.
But Vi, you probably might have heard of him, Vi Rain.
Vig, oh yeah, is that how you say it?
Well, I call him Vig, but everyone called him Vi, so I started calling him Vi now. But I suppose you're also thinking Vig.
Well, because his name to me, when I look at it, it looks like it's a takeoff. There's an actor by that name. His name is Ving Rhames. And you might remember, have you ever seen Pulp Fiction?
I have, yes.
Okay, so Ving Rhames is the actor that plays the black guy that gets raped in the basement. Bruce Willis comes back and saves him.
Yeah, that guy.
That's the actor's
guy.
name, and I think I even said that to him once. I'm like, is your name like a takeoff of that actor? I mean, if you look at the actor's name, how it's spelled, and this guy's name, it's almost like identical. It's, like I said, the actor's name is Ving Rhames, and his name is almost similar, right? It's like Ving Rhymes or something.
Ving Rain, just like rain as in rain. The thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Down. Like I said again, like what does that even mean? But
Well, it's people's names on the internet. There's always something weird about it. Sometimes they're clever, sometimes they're just names. But what kind of matters is that you just when you look at the name or you hear the name, you know who's meant, and you associate something with that name.
There's somebody that just logged onto the server a little while ago, and his name. I almost started laughing while we started doing this because it was absolutely hilarious. I'll find out what it is later because it's rather inappropriate. So, one of the things that you said you weren't sure if you wanted to mention is like when it comes, we'll go back to the coding thing, like the time it takes to do some of these things. Like you said you want to maybe give like kind of like a time frame of like how long does it actually take you to do some of this stuff. When you actually told me how long, I was really kind of shocked. I was like, really?
Well, I'm gonna save the big number for the end game part, which we're gonna touch on again.
Okay,
but just generally speaking, it of course depends on how much I go into detail and how much I try to just polish something and make it work properly. And of course, which is a big factor for me, how much I get sidetracked while I do it. But even like a small feature like the vehicle jumping still takes me, I say, about 2 to 3 hours of fully focused work just to get it implemented and tested. And that's like a very quick example because I already planned it out in my head in detail before. It's not so complex that I can't put it together in my head entirely. But when you go into something bigger, for example, the event module, which I slapped together when 60 started doing events, just to be able to have people join an event and then have their own chat and their own notifications and being able to perform certain actions or limitations on this group of players. I think that's been over a week of time that I had to put into it so far, like a full week of just work without factoring in the actual time I spent at my real job or the time that I spent doing other things than coding. Just a pure week, sleeping 8 to 10 hours a night and then just getting up and then working. It's pretty
you get
insane.
that much sleep?
Yes, I do. But it's I dream a lot, so it's not like the sleep is that efficient. So don't worry.
Okay, good.
It's not as great as you would think.
We don't want to get you tired. Okay, so this was actually on the original questions that we didn't get to, and it's funny because it's actually the most asked question I think of all time that I've noticed is your name versus the associated color you get.
Yes.
So, and of course, there's a question like, why does it turn like when you're local, right? The color turns. But do you know? Is there a form? Because I've seen people try to figure it out. I think Slob was the one that got the closest, but I don't think he actually really did nail it down. I got a little separate story on that. But do you know how it's done? And would you ever tell anybody how it's done so they could get the color they want? And obviously, probably the answer is no, because then everybody would be like red or blue. And where does it come from? How do they? Where does that actual color thing come from?
It is something that is built into JC2MP itself, like outside of the reach of anyone who codes for a server, anyone who actually uses the tools that the JC2MP developers give you. They put this into the game. It's the same on every server. And I have a rough idea of how it works. I've had a conversation with one of the developers about this before, but I don't know the exact formula. I spent about an hour at some point trying to not reverse engineer it, but just figure it out by trying, because I definitely know it's what type of hash function it uses to calculate it. But I couldn't actually figure it out exactly. The problem is, because of the way it's calculated, you don't really notice if you're getting closer or further, because if you're just off by one tiny digit somewhere, one character somewhere, you already get a completely different result. So unless you
because
really...
because everybody, like, you see people doing it. I mean, like, even Draki's done it like a million times. They do everything they possibly can to try to get the color they want. And like I said, I think that's probably the thing that people want to do the most is actually change their color. Because my original username was just Eric, and it was pink.
Was it really? Can't remember.
Which I didn't really care. And then when I changed it to Eric Beans, it turned like kind of like a purple. And I added the 006. That was just a game we were playing with Spirit, and now it's kind of like I don't know, some sort of like burnt red or whatever. So that brings me into the and you'll just have to clarify me if this is actually the events that they actually happened. So it was one of the times that I was at odds with my buddy there, Roddy, and we were kind of teasing him. And I think this was even before you had in place the fake tag. Somebody wants to make themselves like a mod or the owner.
Mm-hmm.
They could do it, and then they would, a mod would have to say, no, you can't do that. Get out of here. Get punished. Whatever. And then you implemented the fake tag. But before that, it was one of my times that Rod likes to say that I was always like, kind of bugging him and getting on his nerves. So I changed my name. So I put the brackets there. Instead of putting mod, I put Moody.
I remember that.
Okay, he put Moody, and I changed my name to Herrick Rarick, like kind of like Hair Rot, but putting my name in there, and it came out Mod Blue. And he got upset. He's like, change it right away. And I was like, well, why? It doesn't say Mod, it says Moody. Right? He just got really up. I was like, just change him. Like, what am I doing that's wrong? Yes, I was being a jerk. I was really, pushing his buttons. And then a few moments later, you came on, and I was like, yeah, okay, maybe I've gone too far. And I think you actually did ask me to change it, and I gave you a little bit of pushback, but I did it anyway. So did he actually? This guy's, kind of like skirting the edge of, trying to impersonate a mod, and had you come on and say to me, change it. Do you remember it happening that way?
That's the problem about all these instances of something happening. I really don't remember.
No, because it was amazing that it actually turned out blue.
Well,
I mean, it was mod blue, perfect, like dead on.
Once again, that's something I wouldn't fully agree with, because I don't think the color that I use for moderators can even be reached exactly by the random color generator. There's subtle differences.
When I come on, next time you come on and I'm on, I will change it, and you can tell me if it's. I don't know if you can tell if it's the same blue, but
Yeah,
I mean, because you can see the chat of him and I talking, and it was the exact same color, or so close you couldn't tell. Do you even know how many colors are available?
No. That's because I don't know. So when you take a color, right? You put in the way they're generated is you put in 3 values. You put in a color value, which is between 0 and 360, which determines which color it is. Red, green, blue, or anything in between. And then you put in a saturation and a lightness. And I don't know how high where they set the limits for the saturation and the lightness. Otherwise, you could calculate it. It's probably an absolute ton of colors, though. But you don't notice the differences between some of them just because they are so faint. And depending on what kind of monitor you have, what kind of panel it uses to display those colors, you won't even be able to tell.
Yeah, Carr was good at that. He had the best colors ever. When he had the garage, would actually not buy them, but in-game role play thing they would buy. So he would come up with a color for them, and then you can take a car to your base and then put it there, and then it makes that car spawn at your base. All right, so this last bit, I'm gonna actually let you ask yourself this question and then answer it yourself, and we'll go into the end game part. So you ask the question you want to ask yourself, and then you answer it.
All right. So the first question I would ask myself is, how is the moderation going to continue long term, for the rest of the duration of the server? And this is where I honestly see a bit of an issue, because we talked about it last time about how the more desirable players are going away and how we're left with more and more randoms. And just in general, we had this talk later on, like just more and more people who are just a bit off. And the problem is, from all this pool of people, I still have to draw staff members, because regardless of who's handling stuff right now, everyone will eventually get, just tired of the game or burned out. So we're going to have to replace people at some point. And if the pool of available people at that time doesn't give me anyone who I actually trust with the abilities a moderator has, who do I make staff then? Who do I give moderator permissions to? Who do I trust to enforce rules? And this is an issue. I mean, last time I gave you a prediction that by 2022, there's not going to be any player base left that you would really want to interact with on the social level. I'm going to tell you, by 2021, we're slowly going to run into this issue of just not knowing who to give moderator to. Given the current rate of just how the player base evolves.
So technically that could be the end game.
Yes.
You don't, because you really would not want to leave it unmoderated.
Well, personally, I'd rather keep it running just like that, but without moderation, than just shutting the server down entirely. But I feel like people have gotten so used to the moderation, they kind of feel entitled to it, even though this is not a standard across many other games. On my server, you pretty much always have a moderator keeping an eye on chat, responding to reports, and just maybe even just sitting around the server just to make sure that they can respond quicker to things that are going on. But this isn't really a given in many places, and on many games, especially online games, well, only online games, because who's there to moderate a single player game? But
right. Anon would do it.
So in many multiplayer games, there's just nobody there to moderate, to enforce rules. Maybe you have like some big overarching entity that when things really go wrong, you can do some kind of report, and super indirectly, maybe someone out there in the community management department or whatever company they outsource their community management to might look into it. But generally speaking, in many other games, you are the only one who can do something about your situation. There's nobody out there looking out after you. And I feel like once people get used to this, they can still enjoy Just Cause. It's going to get more toxic, no doubt, because there's just nobody who prevents people from saying things that they really shouldn't be saying. And there's nobody who prevents people from doing stuff like passive ramming. But at the same time, people may or may not be able to just adapt to that. I think that's my take on it anyways. Of course, it's going to affect player retention, but maybe not. Yes.
That even goes back to like saying, well, let's say there's no, because that does happen, right? There's no moderator and somebody's doing something, and again, like I said, well, you can just go someplace else.
Yes.
There's other tools, right? There's passive. You can hide yourself in the map. There's other things you can do, and just like any argument, you can, especially if somebody's being toxic, you can just choose not to engage. I mean, that's just even something in life. Somebody's screaming at you, or I had some idiot yelling at me the other day because I wasn't wearing a mask, and I just whatever, and I just turned around and walked away. I just didn't respond, and maybe like even so, because that's happened even in chat, and I brought this up one time. I said, I wish I could just mute somebody, and I even brought that up. Maybe you and I even discussed. I was like, well, what if you just gave somebody just a little bit of ability? Even like somebody who was like a trusted, that could, what if they could just mute, especially for things like that? But somebody gave me a response. Maybe it was Dennis. I don't know. And the response to me, kind of made sense. Like, well, what would be the point of that? Of just giving them the ability to just mute somebody? Why not just make them a mod? Because that's really the whole point of the job itself, is controlling the community to the point where you because really, what does a mod do? His main job is actually player retention. Because if you're playing and you can't really enjoy it because somebody's doing something that's bothering you, then they're just going to leave.
Yes.
So a mod's job really is not, its title really isn't rule enforcer, but really player retention. Make sure that everybody's happy, kind of like a concierge. When you go to a ritzy hotel, they make sure your car gets parked. You go up to your room, things like that. But I guess really, I guess you'll just have to see. Just take it day by day, see who's around. But yeah, that to me seems like that makes more sense than anything. If there's nobody around to moderate the server, then how could you really? They'll just drop off anyway because there's nobody there to help you out, when things go bad.
Well, there are these types of players who are able to just, make their own luck, so to say, by just joining and just doing whatever they feel like doing. The only problem is if that is in the way of other people, like, I think it's a saying one philosopher once brought up, your freedom only goes as far until it limits someone else's freedom. Something along those lines.
Your right to throw a punch ends when it hits my face.
Essentially. Yeah. And these are the kinds of situations you get into there. And the problem is the stronger ones will survive. The one who is going to not just engage in the argument, or either engage in the argument and be the last one standing, or be the one who dodges it without having his experience impacted too much that it actually makes him leave. But yeah, I suppose that pretty much concludes my take on the moderation. Is there anything you want to add to the moderation part?
Well, like we said before, I could literally sit here all day and I could come up with like a billion questions, which I'm not, because I think a lot of those things just. I don't want this to be boring. I want people to actually stick around, actually get something from it, not just listen to you and I just even talk about random things. Like I even said, I had a question. I'm not going to ask it because it's. I even think you said you didn't even know. Maybe we'll go into the fact that you can, in some places you can drive off the map and go, 100 kilometers off the map, and some places you crash and you're like, I didn't even know that was even a thing. I was like, why? I said, you know where these places are? Because I've done it. And who knows? Maybe it's because the amount of people who are doing it, it usually happens when somebody's driving in a Jeep on the water and they don't realize where they're going and it crashes the game. But I've been in boats and planes, and I saw somebody the other day, they were 100 kilometers away. But you said you didn't know, right? You don't know what the mechanic is behind that?
Yeah, I don't know what actually makes someone crash. It's more of a thing of just, my personal.
I'm sure somebody knows. Probably, I'll bet you Anon knows, but.
No, he won't.
You don't think so?
No, I
He
don't.
literally knows like every name of every single village on the map. You don't.
Yeah, but he doesn't know anything about the technical backgrounds.
Oh, maybe.
Crashes happen because of technical backgrounds, not because of names Avalanche gave some things.
Do you think it's random?
Well, I mean, nothing is really random when it comes to computers. There's a pattern to it, to pretty much all of it. You would just have to dig deep enough to actually figure it out. The thing is, to us, perceivably, it's probably just random, yes. Because my impression was you can just go into any direction as far as you want to, and maybe eventually your game will start doing very weird things because you were never meant to go that far outside of the map area. Same way which happens when you go into space. But at the same time, it's happened to me that I teleported to coordinates just outside of the main map area, like not like just a few kilometers offshore, and my game would just randomly crash. So it's just kind of random. It's just the best way to think about it is as soon as you're doing something that the base game didn't intend for you to do, there's always a chance for it to just break. And if it doesn't break, it's just a matter of there's some certain conditions in the game engine right now that save you from this fully just crashing the game. And that's pretty much the start and end of it.
Well, as we tell all the new guys that join, like my game crashed, and we always tell them, that's a feature, not a fault.
Well, that is a fault, but the fault is probably reconstructible if you just put, enough time into finding it, which may or may not be a reasonable amount of time for a human being to put into something like that.
Yeah.
But I suppose I can use this as my segue into the second part of my endgame, topic, which is the coding aspect of the entire thing. So personally for me, what I still want to do with the game is I want to get my personal goals done. Like there are all these ideas that I just cooked up randomly, in the process that I explained last time of just, letting my mind wander and thinking of how I would make the server if I would start over, and then thinking, hey, I can still do this, and then putting it on the list. There are many of these things that I just want to see happen, just out of personal interest. Some of them intersect with what players want to see, or are at least something that players would appreciate to see. But at the same time, some of the things are just things that players are completely indifferent about and would probably start asking why I spend my time doing these kinds of things, even though they have no benefit from it, like no visible one anyways. But just from myself, I want to get these done. At least the ones that I decided that are realistically possible without pouring a ridiculous amount of effort into something that's really not feasible anymore by the time you're done. But then I suppose this is the place where I can throw in the number I came up with earlier.
I'm telling you, I was really?
So I went through my entire list of all these things I just described that either came in through suggestions or through my own ideas that I still have on my list that I would love to see. And just a random ballpark figure, if I was to spend pretty much my entire available free time coding, I would end up having to code for about 210 days consecutively until my list would be empty. And honestly, given the experience I have on my own server these days when I join it, I'm starting to feel like this is not really worth the effort anymore. And I'm probably going to start cutting corners. I mean, really, the only factor that makes me want to finish this list is myself, my own sense of completionism. It's like it's almost a bit of an obsession for me to always want to deliver a complete product. But it's a bit of an it's kind of counterproductive if you were working on something like Just Cause, like a Just Cause server in general, like a multiplayer server that never will be complete. So the real question is, how long do I still think putting my time into this is feasible? Many people would have already said it's not feasible anymore at all, and all the time I've put into it since 2018 was probably a waste of time. I sometimes second guess myself in that way, but I still think sometimes I'm just still making new experiences, and having a place to vent some creativity just really doesn't hurt that much. But there is a big possibility out there that one day I'll just join the server, I'll see I'll look at what's happening on the server. I see it as a place that I really can't really identify myself with anymore, and just decide, you know what, why should I continue coding for this? So from that point onwards, the server would basically just be stale, at least in terms of features, independent of how the player base or the moderation topics are moving on.
Well, because I mean, there's only so much you can do, and plus, I'll say it only because I've been a prick to you a couple of times. It's like really, it is pretty. You have to remember that it is kind of thankless. Who really thanks you? I mean, they're getting something that really they do. So there's quite a few. I'm looking at the feed right now. And just within the screen that I'm looking at, there's at least a dozen people who play this and have played it for a really long time. It must kind of like deflate you a little bit, not even to be randomly thanked, because you're getting something for. I mean, yes, they paid for the game. The multiplayer is free, and you really don't really get that much thanks from it. That must kind of deflate you just a little bit. I mean, you have to be. I mean, let's be honest. That does deflate you. Like, hey, you know what? Hey, thanks. But most of the time, what do you get?
Well,
people like me complaining.
That was what I was going to say. Many times. I mean, it's also kind of down to just the approach I take to coding, because to all the features I put into the server and all the work, because I mostly have it dictated by my own whim. I don't actually work how you would do it if this was a business where you would focus your doings around what the customers want. Because, I don't have customers, nobody pays me. So I can pretty much just do whatever I want to. But that means that there's always a bit of a disconnect between what I spend my time into and what players would want me to spend my time into. But yeah, it's still a bit of a thankless, not just a bit, but a pretty thankless job.
So
when you just put in all this time and half the time people don't even know what's happening in the background.
Yeah, especially when you post like the back end stuff. I'm like, okay, it might as well be in Klingon because it's just gibberish to me. I don't know what you're saying. So that will lead me, we'll end this by saying, well, I'll give everybody a little bit of a challenge. And that challenge would be, how about, especially with like the core players, I'm looking at names here, and I know these people are on Discord too. How about everybody just maybe drop you a little line and say, you know what? Thank you, right? Thank you for the time you've put into it. I mean, look, you haven't even done some of this stuff. That's 210 days. You probably knew even calculated all the stuff that you've done in the past. Yes, I have, been kind of a pain in the neck myself, but I think I have actually, maybe in roundabout terms, kind of thanked you. But I think everybody should maybe even go on Discord after listening to this and say, yeah, I noticed that I've never actually really thanked you, especially all the things of all the time that they've played and all the things they've done, the people they've met. Really, they wouldn't have been able to do any of this if it weren't for you. So I would kind of like maybe just end this where we're saying, hey, take 5 minutes out of your day instead of drawing weird pictures and posting retarded memes, and say thank you to Alpha. So Alpha, thank you for doing this. This was something even before the podcast. I'd like to. I wanted to just do this because I'm just a curious guy. But I will end it there. And really, thank you for doing this. I don't know when this is going to come out. Obviously,
I wish I knew.
For time travel purposes, it's out right now. But so again, we'll just end it there and say thank you. Why is it called Salt Factory, and where did you get that idea?
So initially, when I split from Nologam, it was a bit of a
That's
spontaneous.
2 by the way.
Thanks, I noticed as well.
Like cut it out and whatever. Go
trying.
ahead, sorry.
Initially, when I split from. Oh God, I did it again. Okay, I'm going to cut this short.
No, leave it in. Or maybe you can make it an outtake, but leave it in. It's funny because,
it reminds us.
It's like funny. No, don't take it out. Just keep going. Go
breathing.
It.
Okay.
Yeah.
Initially, when I split from Nologam, I had to come up with a name pretty much.
You even said to me after, I was like, I really was hoping you'd ask me that question, but, such is life.
All right, then.
So we'll end it. I guess we'll just end it there.
Yes,
All
right,
right, thanks,
right
Alvin.
here at this point.
Ready?
3, 2,
On your
1.
mark, get set, go. Bye.